Hi, everybody, and welcome to Spark Rentals Facebook Live and podcast.
Happy Tuesday.
Both Brian and I are on together.
I know it seems like it's the first time in a while.
It does. It does. It's been an interesting summer. Last week, Brian, you interviewed Andy Kalaji from the House Guys, and that was a great interview. We're getting feedback on that. And this week, with the lifting of the ban on evictions, we're going to do evictions post-moratorium. What you landlords all need to know about this, because it is going to cause a little upheaval. So let's start with just a brief description on exactly what this eviction moratorium was.
Sure. And as you guys join us, let us know where you're tuning in from and let us know what your questions are. This is an interactive broadcast, unlike your typical podcast series. So the federal eviction moratorium, it started back in spring 2020 with the CARES Act, and then that actually expired last summer. And then the CDC went in and created their own moratorium that was more extensive. That was originally scheduled to expire at the end of last year, at the end of 2020, and then it kept getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back until eventually,
which is crazy in itself that the CDC would even get involved in this to begin with. But anyway, go ahead.
Right, and a lot of people felt that it was an overstep of their boundaries and their mission. So it was a pretty comprehensive nationwide eviction ban. There was an income cap for tenants, but it was pretty high. Single tenants could earn as much as $99,000. Married tenants could earn as much as $198,000 for their adjusted gross income for the previous year, and still fall under this ban and not be allowed to be evicted. And the rules for qualifying were pretty easy. It was things like having to experience a, quote, substantial loss of household income, but the documentation required was not very extensive. So most tenants fell under this eviction moratorium that was nationwide. Now, with this nationwide moratorium ending as of July 31st, a couple days ago, there are still some states that impose their own eviction moratoriums or moratoria. I guess I'm not sure what the proper plural of that word is. And a lot of them have kind of quirky rules. Some of them are simple and straightforward, but a lot of them, it's not really clear whether you can evict. And landlords, in some cases, they can technically file for eviction, but they have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to do it. So, for example, in 4 states, in Massachusetts, Nevada, New York, and Oregon, landlords can't file to evict tenants if those tenants have a pending application for rental assistance.
And with that being said, there's a backlog of these applications. So technically, these tenants or the landlords are kind of stuck until they catch up, which who knows when that'll be.
Precisely. So the federal government, surprise, surprise, has done a terrible job rolling out the money that it earmarked for rental assistance. So, and then of course states have bungled it to various degrees as well. So there's money that has been set aside for rental assistance and has rolled out, but most tenants and landlords don't actually have access to it because the process of applying for that has been delayed and in many cases been extremely confusing, both for tenants and for landlords. So, in these states where landlords can't file for eviction, if there's a pending application for rent assistance, like you said, Denny, that could be months and months from now. It could be a year from now, depending on how slowly and inefficiently these governments roll out the benefits. So
Julian Olin from DC is saying, and we were going to talk about that in a little further on in the broadcast, but that evictions in DC against tenants for non-payment has been extended through October 12th. And I'm going to be putting a link in the chat that will take you to more detailed information about each state and their standards and what they're allowing and not allowing. But DC,
Yeah,
that's a tough one.
yeah. DC is very tenant friendly, very tenant friendly. So we'll quickly walk through some of these states that still have eviction moratoriums in place. Since Julian pointed out DC, we can start there. So there is a rule that landlords who had filed for eviction before the pandemic, but whose tenants were given a stay by the nationwide moratorium, they can file for eviction as early as August 26th. But of course, that's not most landlords in DC with tenants who are behind on rent. So, like Julian said, for most tenants, it's October 12th is when they can start filing again. And DC did put a 60-day notice requirement in place for filing eviction for non-payment of rent. So very onerous on the landlord, very restrictive, but not surprising at all for a very tenant-friendly jurisdiction like
Right.
DC. So Hawaii, their moratorium ends in just a couple of days. That ends on August 6th, assuming that it's not extended. In Maryland, right next to DC, they have an eviction moratorium in place that ends on August 15th. Again, if it's not extended, Maryland is also very tenant friendly, my home state, and I no longer invest there because of that. Illinois has an eviction moratorium in place that is scheduled to end on August 31st. New York has a moratorium that is also scheduled to end on August 31st. But they have some other quirky rules involved, and landlords have to if tenants submit a hardship letter, then there's extra hoops for the landlord to jump through. California has an eviction moratorium in place through September 30th. New Jersey has a really long moratorium in place through the end of this year, through the end of
Which
2021.
is not surprising at all.
No, not surprising at all. New Jersey is very blue, very tenant friendly. Not a great place to be a landlord. And then there are a couple of states that have, some more quirky rules about when landlords can file for eviction, when they can't. So, for example, Washington State right now they are not allowing most evictions for rent that's owed between April of 2020 and June 2021. In Oregon, again, we talked about how Oregon, landlords can't evict if tenants have a pending application for rent assistance, but there are some additional rules there. So landlords have to give tenants until the end of February 2022 to make up those rent payments that were owed from what they consider the height of the pandemic. That's April 2020 to June 2021. So landlords are supposed to give tenants what they say a reasonable rent payment plan option to make up those payments between now and the end of February.
And I love the use of the words reasonable.
Right. Because that's not a loaded or subjective term or anything.
No.
And then Connecticut has some quirky rules as well. Landlords can't file for eviction unless or until the landlord has applied for federal rental assistance. So Connecticut set up a web portal called Unite CT that landlords have to go through, and they have to the landlord has to file themselves for federal rental assistance. And then it's super quirky, and it's now a 30-day appeal process before you can file for eviction instead of a 3-day appeal process. And so Denny is sending. Okay, so she sent a link here in the comments to where we have some more details about these state-specific eviction moratoriums. So if you're in any of those states, or what's that, Denny?
Oh, I was just saying, Kevin Thompson was saying that Ohio is proceeding with evictions, and he brings out a good point. Certain larger cities are going to be more difficult than others. And I think it's very important to know that not only do you have to check into your state's regulations revolving around this, but also, especially if you're in a larger city, but any jurisdiction, you want to make sure and check, because they're all going to pop out with their own individual, regulations around how to do this.
Yeah, that's a
He
great
also
point,
goes
Kevin.
on to say it's sad that states like New Jersey and Connecticut, it wipes out the mom and pop landlords, and he's right. And it's more likely that the giant faceless corporation that owns thousands of units can even weather this. But
Right.
absolutely right on that.
Yeah, so that's one of the problems with anti-landlord regulation. And I don't want to take it too political of a place, but this is largely a blue state phenomenon, right? The anti-landlord regulation, tenant-friendly regulation. One of the downsides of that is that it really puts mom and pop landlords and rental investors at a disadvantage to large corporate landlords that can, they have legal teams in place who can um, get them through all of the heavy regulation and red tape. But your average mom and pop landlord, they're not interested and really aren't equipped to cut through all of this kind of regulation and red tape. Nor do they have the pockets to do it. Right? They don't have deep enough pockets
Right.
to
I mean,
go a year and a
there's so
half
many.
without rent, like a lot of landlords have in the pandemic. So,
And
and
it's really
despite, by the
pressured
way,
a lot
extended
of,
unemployment benefits that tenants have been
and
receiving.
there's that. A lot of we see it in a lot of our real estate groups that you can hear the stories, you can hear the sadness, you can hear the devastation of people who just wanted to start investing, and then something like this happens and it completely overwhelms them. And yeah,
So
it's
yeah, I mean, this has been a recurring theme that Denny, you and I have talked about many times on the podcast and on the blog, how we really encourage landlords to invest in jurisdictions that are more landlord friendly. Um, a lot of new investors don't consider that. They just look at things like cap rates. Um, but they really should consider the local regulations, both on the state and the city level before they invest, and
absolutely,
avoid areas that are extremely tenant friendly. And Kevin goes on to say it's no doubt
absolutely.
contributing to the current housing shortage crisis, among other factors, of course. And it's true. It's absolutely true. When you regulate the hell out of landlords, no one wants to invest in rental properties, right? So, um, anyway, so Denny, now what? What are the next steps here? Both on like a macro scale and for individual landlords.
Well, I mean, the Census Bureau survey estimates that there's about 3.6 million people at risk of eviction. So now, granted, some of these states are going to prevent some of that. So I guess there could be good and bad in that. But the courts are going to be completely overwhelmed. We already have a labor shortage out there. So they're already hurting. So now we're going to just throw an influx of court cases, and you're going to have delays and all kinds of things. So just because the ban is lifted doesn't mean, oh, we're going to get these tenants out. It just means now we can file in court.
It means
So,
now you
and
can
that's a
start the
process.
process. And
Right.
you should expect the process to be very long and longer than usual because of this backlog and the delays. And it also means that you should start now. I mean, serve that eviction notice on your renters now. And we do offer free eviction notices for each state, by the way, on our software. Denny, if you have a second, if you can put that link in the comments. But yeah, we do offer
I
free eviction
can.
notices. You can serve those on your tenants now to get the ball rolling. And well, assuming that your state or city allows you to do so. Um,
Yeah.
and once each one of those notices comes with a waiting period, so you have to wait out that period before you can then file in court, and then you'll have another waiting period before the court schedules a hearing. And then, assuming you win at the hearing, there will be more waiting for them to be able to schedule an actual put out date. So, on and on and on. It's a lengthy
And
process. You should
then,
start now.
yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't hesitate. If you're in a state that allows it, charge, just run, go for it. Um, the other issue that is going to happen here is eventually there's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to be evicted. So there's going to be a whole lot of properties. This could happen on the market. And what is that? What do you think, Brian, that that's going to do to the rents?
Well, it can drive down rents if we do see a jump in vacancies, vacant rental housing. Um, but I do think that there's this is going to take time to play out, and I don't think we're all of a sudden going to see. It's not like there's going to be this wave of homelessness all of a sudden, and that within 5 days from now, 3.6 million people are going to be on the street and out of their homes, and that there will be all this vacant inventory. It's not going to play out like that. This is going to take place over the course of the next year, maybe even longer. As the courts work through this backlog, as various states and cities lift their moratoriums, as that rental assistance flows out. And by the way, that rental assistance is going to keep a lot of these people in their homes. So yeah, this is going to play out over time. You're not going to see a sudden jump in vacancies. So
So at this point, I guess what we all need to really do is make sure, again, and I can't reiterate that enough, is to check your states and your locations to see exactly what the procedures are. Because the last thing you want is to start something like this and then it gets you either into hot water or it just takes more time for you to get through it.
yeah, and there are some states that have fines built into their moratorium executive orders, fines for landlords who breach the rules. I think it was Connecticut, where it was $1,000 fine for the first offense and $5,000 for subsequent offenses. So these are quite serious fines. Don't quote me on that being Connecticut. It may have been New York, but anyway, double check the rules in your state. And that may mean wading through some of the executive orders that have been released by your governor or your mayor. But we do have some information and some links on our site about this as well. So double check your local and state rules. Start the process if you can. Serve the eviction notice first, and then file in court for a hearing if you don't get that back rent. Because you're going to have delays and there is going to be a backlog. So the sooner that you can start this process with your wayward tenants, the better. And hopefully, your tenants catch up the rent. There is $47 billion of federal rental assistance allocated for this. And with a lot of tenants going back to work right now, hopefully they will be able to catch it up as well.
Right. What about a different approach to investing?
Well, right. So, for landlords with existing properties, you can, once you get those tenants out, you can look into potentially changing your rental model and renting it as a short-term rental on Airbnb if you don't want to hassle with long-term tenants anymore. I would certainly understand that for the landlords who have had to eat a year's worth of lost rents in this process. As far as buying new investments, you can always consider land investing, which is almost not regulated at all, which is what I love about it. So, yeah, I mean, these are a couple different models to consider. You can also do things like invest through real estate crowdfunding for a more passive approach to it, and that's something that we're going to talk more about in the coming weeks. But yeah, I mean, you can look at your existing properties, and now is actually a good time to sell as well, right? If you want to sell your property and just cash out, that's something that Kevin mentions here. He says, I know many mom and pop landlords in my area who just want to sell with these sky high prices rather than continue being a landlord in the wake of this eviction moratorium and unpaid rents and just the major hassles and costs that a lot of mom and pop landlords have experienced over the last year and a half. So that's an option as well. Sell out while you're ahead, and then potentially switch your model of real estate investing moving forward. Or if you're in an area with plenty of tourist traffic, you can switch it over to Airbnb, a short-term rental model, or as Al Williamson always promotes, a a mid-term renting model, like
Mhm.
corporate rentals where you're renting for like 2, 3, 4 months at a time. Um, so yeah, those are a few options to consider moving forward.
Awesome. Well, I think for now that's all we have on this subject. I have a feeling we'll be talking about it again sooner rather than later.
We will. And we'll actually, so next week at 2 p.m. Eastern, next Tuesday, we're going to talk about a sister conversation to this one. And that's about the foreclosure moratorium ending and some of the investing opportunities that that might present for you as an investor. So that's kind of a flip side of a similar coin here. So next Tuesday, join us for that, and we'll talk about the foreclosure ban lifting and what the opportunities are available for you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, and have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you on the flip side, and we'll see you next
All right,
Tuesday.
guys, have a great week. See you next Tuesday.